Hello, thank you for joining us today. My name is Sarah Brady, and I'm the interim CEO here at CCST. I'd like to open our webinar today by acknowledging that we are hosting today's meeting from what we now call the state of California, which is home to many indigenous communities that have stewarded this land since time immemorial. I'm excited that you're all here today to learn about CCST's Science and Technology Policy Fellowship Program. As an alum of the program myself and now the interim CEO here, I really can't overstate the value of this program. It was a career-changing and even life-changing opportunity for me, as I know it has been for many of our alums as well. So I'm really excited you are all here considering this opportunity, and I hope it will be career-changing for you too. Now I'd like to introduce Puneet Bhullar, CCST's Interim Director of Policy Engagement, to dig into the details. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Puneet Bhullar, and I'm the Interim Director of Policy Engagement at CCST, and I have the pleasure of directing the Science Fellows Program. Today, I'll briefly introduce CCST, provide an overview of the fellowship, what we're looking for, the application process, and what we offer. And then along with the three of our alumni, we'll answer questions to help you as you consider applying for the fellowship. So who are we? The California Council on Science and Technology is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization established over 35 years ago at the request of the legislature. CCST was created to provide science and technology advice from the wealth of outstanding academic and research institutions in our state directly to policymakers. California is lucky to have an incredible network of expertise, and our job at CCST is to contribute to strengthening and informing California policy through scientific knowledge, research, and innovation. We do this through a number of different mechanisms, including expert briefings, workshops, peer-reviewed reports, and of course, we run the CCST Science and Technology Policy Fellowship Program, which is why you're all here today. This year, we're celebrating 15 years of CCST Fellows, and last November, we welcomed the 15th cohort of Fellows who are currently working in their placement offices around Sacramento. Since 2009, we've trained 172 PhD scientists and engineers in policy, and we're looking forward to welcoming the 16th cohort later this year. Applications close in about 6 weeks on March 1st, and the fellowship begins later this year on November 1st. I'd like to make a quick note that we also have limited opportunities for some fellows to begin work at CCST earlier, and I'll get a little bit into that shortly. After training, fellows are placed in either the Senate, Assembly, governor's offices, and state agencies, working on subjects ranging from utilities and energy to finance to transportation, among many other policy areas. So why should you apply to become a CCST fellow? I'm going to highlight 3 different reasons for you. First, as a CCST fellow, you get to learn about how government works and how decision-making happens firsthand by engaging in the process. Second, you get a chance to leverage the skills you've developed in your research training and extracurriculars to help advise decision makers and impact policies in California. And finally, this is a year of professional and personal growth, exploration, and transformation as you try something new and work in a policy environment. CCST also provides training throughout the fellowship, as well as professional development opportunities and funds to support you in your career exploration. You might also be wondering, why California? The work you do in California not only impacts nearly 40 million residents in the state, but also the 5th largest economy in the world. So the work you'll do has implications beyond the state. California is a leader in many policy areas, including the environment, science and technology, and the state's policies are often replicated in other states at the federal level and in other countries. Finally, you don't need to have a strong California connection to apply to the fellowship. You just have to show a strong interest in learning about and serving the state of California. Our fellows have come from institutions in 29 different states, territories, and countries. So let's dig into what you get out of the fellowship a little bit more. The fellowship is a direct experience-based learning opportunity to participate in policymaking firsthand and to see what it's like to be in a room where decisions are being made. As I said before, as a science fellow, you will be placed directly into a government office, either in the legislature or the executive branch, and work as a full-time staff member in that office for the year. Now, alongside your work of being in your placement office, CCST provides the support and training you need to be successful throughout your fellowship. Prior to placement, you go through a month-long policy boot camp to learn the ins and outs of California government and policymaking process before you begin. During the fellowship, you'll participate in seminars and workshops to expand your network and learn professional skills. Furthermore, you'll have the opportunity to receive mentorship from our engaged alumni network. And speaking of our alumni, the vast majority of our alumni go into policy-related careers after the fellowship, with many choosing to stay within California state government, either in the legislature or executive branch. But many former fellows also work in the nonprofit sector, private industry, and academia. So there's no one size fits all for career pathways after the fellowship, and CCST is here to help you as you decide what's next for you. CCST alumni expressed that their fellowship experience has been instrumental to their career development and that it's opened up opportunities that they wouldn't have ever known about while they're in their PhD and postdoc programs. Here's a quote that expresses this sentiment. The fellowship will give you the structure and training and access to help you build your career path. And if all that sounds really good to you, let me remind you how to get started in applying for the fellowship. So to apply, you must be done with your PhD by September 15th this year and eligible to work on a full-time basis for a US employer. This means you don't need to have your PhD in hand to apply, just a graduation date before September 15th. And on the other hand, it doesn't matter how long it's been since you've completed your PhD. If it's been 5, 10, 50 years, it doesn't matter. You're still eligible to apply. As far as materials are concerned, you'll need 2 letters of recommendations along with your resume, CV, and a completed application that includes your statement of purpose. You can read more about our eligibility requirements and compensation on the FAQ page on our website. Now let's talk a little bit about timeline. The deadline for applications is March 1st, so be sure to send your letter of recommendation request as soon as possible if you're applying this year to ensure that your application is completed by that date. Interview notices are sent in April with finalist interviews scheduled for May. The fellowship start date is November 1st, 2024, but as I mentioned before, please do apply even if the November start date is not ideal for you, because for the last several years, we have had a handful of fellows who have started earlier than November in the CCST office working on expert briefings, workshops, and other policy work before the boot camp training begins on November 1st. Now that you know the process for applying, who are we looking for? So understand that working in policy will be different. It will be a different experience than what you may have experienced in grad school. In placement offices, there are hard deadlines, lots of teamwork, and you'll most likely be working on subjects that are not related to your technical expertise. This will be a big cultural change for many of you from academia. And so in your application materials and interviews, we'll be looking for excellent communicators, great team players, people who are adaptable, open-minded, and willing to learn. So that wraps up the introduction part of our webinar today, but please prepare your questions for our alumni panel in this next section of the webinar. If you have any questions or concerns that don't get addressed in this Q&A, please connect with us on social media and follow up with Bethany Hopkins, our Science Fellows Program Manager, or myself via email. Now, I'd like to turn things over to our panelists for a Q&A session. Today, we have with us 3 alumni who are here to share their experience and why they chose a CCST fellowship. We'll have lots of time for audience questions, so please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions for the panel. Feel free to ask questions covering a range of topics related to the fellowship, including why our alumni chose the CCST fellowship, what a day in the life of a fellow looks like, and about the application process. Panelists, I'd like to have each of you introduce yourselves and share why you applied for the fellowship and chose CCST, and how you felt about your overall experience. So with that, I'll turn things over to our panelists. First, I'd like to introduce Alexandra. If you'd like to share with us and kick us off, that'd be great.
Thank you, Puneet. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm so honored to be in this panel. So my name is Alexandra Colón-Rodriguez. I was a fellow in year 13, so in 2022. I was placed in the California Governor's Office of Planning and Research in the Initiative to Advance Precision Medicine. I'm a neuroscientist by training, and so I was really excited for the opportunity to do policy work that I could work on areas that had to do with mental health. the reason that I actually applied for the fellowship was that I never really got hands-on exposure or work on science policy. And I knew that with the communications background that I had and the science background, I could utilize my skill sets to have some impact. And so in addition to that, of course, are all the reasons that Puneet shared with all of us is that California is a leader in environmental issues, in health issues. And so I thought that this would be the best place for me to get exposure to science policy in a state that is so proactive on doing things for the population based on science specifically. And before I move on to the next panelist, I just wanted to say that I'm currently the postdoc program manager for Genentech, which is a biotech company in San Francisco.
Great, thank you, Alexandra. Next up, we have Stephanie.
All right. Hi, everyone. I am Stephanie Mitchell. I am a year 14 fellow, so I just finished my fellowship recently before our newest crop of fellows have been introduced. So I received my PhD from the University of Minnesota, where I was kind of studying how the battery materials that are in electric vehicles impact the environment. And I had a lot of reasons for being really interested in wanting to do some kind of policy fellowship, and especially one in California. I mean, I really enjoyed science communication, and I think especially watching the way science and policy played out over the pandemic was really intriguing and at some points aggravating. And I think a lot of my inspiration was kind of just the direction of my research. I was studying the negative consequences of something that was intended to reduce negative environmental impact. And I was really coming to the realization that I was only studying like a small sliver of the things of this entire landscape of consideration that decision makers needed to understand in order to make informed decisions. So I wanted to better understand that landscape and then be a resource for people who were elected to make those decisions. And as Alexandra was saying, California is kind of the place to be if you are interested in like a lot of the forefront of these policy decisions. And especially in California, like you get to watch bills and be involved in bills and analyze bills and amend bills that eventually become law at the end of your time if you get placed in the legislature. And like that was just a remarkable thing that I wanted to experience and kind of be a part of. So I was placed in the Assembly Committee on Water, Parks, and Wildlife, where I am currently working. I'm hired on as a consultant now, which is great. So I get to continue kind of the exciting and fulfillment that I experienced last year as a fellow, kind of being, I guess, essentially like a private investigator for policy, which is a very fun job to do. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephanie. Next up, we have Ope.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be a part of this webinar. My name is Ope Oyewole, and I usually go by Ope. I am Nigerian, and I got my PhD in immunology, pathology, and infectious diseases at the University of Nebraska Medical Center, and was a year 14 fellow along with Stephanie last year. I was placed in the Climate and Sustainability branch of the California Department of Insurance, which was totally different from anything I had done before that year. And I'm currently working as a program associate at CCST while I'm looking for jobs. So if you know anybody hiring, please, I'm just kidding. But there are three main reasons why I decided to do the fellowship. One was the opportunity that the fellowship gives to international students. As I mentioned, I'm Nigerian, and CCST is one of the few opportunities that we have to engage in policymaking in the US as international students. There was also, again, the opportunity to participate in the policymaking process. Like Stephanie, during the pandemic, I started to observe what was happening, comparing policymaking and policy implementation between my country and my continent and with the US and the rest of the Western world, and trying to understand how governments work, how systems work, and the opportunity to be able to go behind the scenes and to learn what policymakers are thinking, what they're basing their decisions on, and be able to inform. That was something that drew me in. And finally, the alumni network. During my application process, everyone I reached out to on LinkedIn was very, very helpful and very, very supportive. I had numerous 30-minute conversations with people. People looked over my application materials and really supported me, and I wanted to be a part of that. And so those were the reasons why I joined in. throughout the process, throughout the fellowship, it was a really great experience. The mentorship from the office and from alumni mentors as well was superb. There were opportunities as a cohort. I think my cohort is the best cohort, but there were opportunities for us to hang out and have fun and do stuff together. And so really, really enjoyed and grateful for the experience. Yeah.
Thank you all so much. It's great to have some background, and I'm really excited to jump into these questions. We have a lot of questions, so I'm just going to dive right in. And the first one we have is, I'm going to direct this towards you, Alexandra, if you don't mind. What experience outside of research do you think made you a competitive applicant?
That's a great question, because I was going to say that I actually didn't, like, I was part of like science policy organizations, but I never did actual like memos or things that other fellows had in my cohort. And so I think what actually made me competitive was my science outreach. So the ability to communicate with any audience, the science in terms that are digestible. The ability is the communications is a big part of being a successful scientist, but also a successful like policy person, like, you know, science policy or advisor or whatever. So I think my outreach in science, and also like the experiences that I had also doing like mentoring and things like that, is the ability to also demonstrate that we could work as a team, but also our leadership skills. And we all, as scientists or PhD graduates, we get a lot of skill sets that we don't know how to convey, like how they are translatable skills that we could utilize in other venues. And so that was a really good thing that I had advice on from a previous fellow that told me how to kind of like showcase the work that I had done, not necessarily directly in policy, but that had policy kind of like components to them. And one of the things was that I'm really, my research was in the toxicity of a heavy metal. And one of the things that I'm always been really interested is in environmental toxicants, how they impact the nervous system. And I was able to share in my application how I was able to write blogs and advice and volunteer for the Flint, water situation while I was a grad student. And I think all of that plays a huge role in demonstrated that although you don't have direct policy experience, you've been working towards kind of building yourself to pursue a career in policy or policy adjacent or related careers. So I think is the ability to share in your statements what has prepared you to get to this point where you think this is what you want to pursue. And to me was my outreach and communication experience.
Great, thank you for that. And to the rest of the panelists, please feel free to jump in if you have any additional thoughts to share. I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next question. And each of you come from a very different background, and all of your placements were fairly different from one another, whether it was in the exec branch or legislature. And I'd be curious to understand, what are the fellows' day-to-day, what does that look like? What are you doing every day? What are you working on? Are there dull days, days where you're not working on a lot of things, days where you're packed? And if you could just talk a little bit about that, that'd be great. I would love to start off with maybe Stephanie, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So as somebody who worked in the legislature for my fellowship and currently does, there are definitely cycles within the legislature of quieter times and speedier times, which did kind of jive with my experience in academia, that like sometimes you were like gearing up to do something really big, and sometimes you were putting in really long hours to get some kind of experiment done. So that's kind of a fun thing that I do. Like I like kind of those really fast-paced times, and during those times it's going to be a lot of meetings. People, you are a kind of a public representative of the California legislature, so the door is always open. People can come through with their problems. So kind of surprise meetings of people wanting to talk about their issues, meeting with staff for different assemblymen and women to help them think through their ideas and talk about any unforeseen consequences of their policy proposal that they're thinking about doing. And then a lot of reading and writing. So what that looks like is different depending on what your issue is. Some things are kind of really well documented and you can get the history of a concept or an idea. And looking through previous bill analyses is really helpful. But of course, a lot of information is actually stored within people who have been doing this job for a while. And so you kind of just get to know your resources, which are not always online, like you maybe are used to when you do kind of scientific research, but like knowing who you want to go to ask questions to. So yeah, it's a lot of kind of social information gathering at this stage. But I'll let people who have kind of different experiences go now.
Ope, did you want to take it next?
Yeah, I was going to add, so Steph has the legislative perspective. I worked in the executive branch in Department of Insurance, and a lot of it for me was meetings. I had a lot of meetings, meeting with stakeholders and going to different insurance focused organization, whether it was international or national or state level discussions. Some of it was meetings with stakeholders that were nonprofit organization members, or some of it was other government agencies that we were collaborating with. There was also some event organizing as well. So trying to get people together in a room and sourcing different stakeholders and experts that could talk on a topic. Like Steph said, there was writing and researching. And a little bit of the legislative process also affected my work as well, because the branch that I was working with was also closely following bills that were going through the legislature. And that's something that I was looking forward to working in this department, being able to see a little bit of the legislative process from the agency side of things, because a lot of times the legislature writes the bills and passes the laws, and then the agencies are the ones that implement those laws. And so that was a little bit of my experience too, seeing it from the agency's point of view, like how does this bill affect us and the work that we're doing? And so that was some stuff that I did.
I guess I'll just add that I was also in the executive. I was in the Office of Planning and Research, and when I stepped in, I guess like Ope just mentioned, like all the grants, like I was basically a manager for research projects that were funded after like the submission happened and all these policies happened before I arrived to the office. And so basically I got to the office and I had the opportunity to lead this research portfolio of projects that were focused on adverse childhood experiences. So my days look like a lot of reading, but a lot of coordination, like organizing meetings, organizing data, working with budgets. It's a ton of emailing, a lot of meetings too, like Ope. But it actually was really great because I got to see some of the policy making through my CCST training, my colleagues, and also through the leadership of the office I was part of. But then I got leadership experience, which I was really excited about, and it led for me to have the position that I have today, leading a program of like almost 200 scientists. And so I think that, sometimes you would think that the position kind of looks a little bit, you may not be placed in the office that is your top choice or whatever, but I assure you that this experience will significantly impact your professional career. And just to have this on your CV has so much weight that people will want to really recruit you and hire you. And so I didn't have a program management experience like as a title before this current role that I have, but the CCST allowed me to do it, to have that role. And so it just really contributed, like it allowed me to have this job. So I think that my day looked very different than most fellows in my cohort, but it was great because it was perfect for what I wanted to, I realized what I wanted to do next. Yeah.
Great, thank you all for that. A lot of the folks joining us today are in the process of applying for the fellowship, and many are thinking about it for next year or whatever. And so some of the ones that are on right now are probably thinking about their letters of recommendation. So I want to hear from each of you, really, and maybe starting with Ope. How did you decide who to ask to submit your letter of recommendation? Like, were they folks who could speak to your technical and research skills, or were they more people that can speak to some of those soft skills that we've mentioned? How did you decide?
I decided based on my relationship mostly with different people. I had my PI write basically on my technical, and I guess because I'd worked with him the longest of everybody that I asked for. And so that was basically technical, but then also my characteristics as a lab member. I also had a mentor, like a personal mentor, who wrote a recommendation letter for me. And then finally, I was part of an organization I am part of an organization in Omaha, Nebraska, that's a local nonprofit. And so I had the executive director, because I had worked with her for a while to write for me. I think mostly I was asking them to highlight more than technical expertise, their experience of working with me and how I showed up in the work that I was doing with them. And then what they thought about like my potential with my career. So that was kind of the focus of my requests to them.
And did either of you, Alex or Stephanie, have a different experience or different thought process when choosing somebody to write your letter of rec?
I did. So I guess, I mean, I did have my graduate school mentor and my two postdoc mentors, but I'm very like, letters of recommendation are so important. I mean, you work really hard on crafting your message in your personal statement, but that's all you can control, right? But I guess I wanted to have a little bit more input in the letters of recommendation. So I sent them basically, what is it that the fellowship looks for in candidates, and how different components from my application or my statement are addressing that I have actually worked really hard and I meet all of those qualifications that the fellowship looks for. And they embedded some of that information in the letters of recommendation because they all had supported me in pursuing service, in pursuing outreach and education efforts. And they all knew very clear that my passion is to give back in whatever way. And so they really were really strongly about supporting me to pursue this fellowship to begin with, because they knew that throughout my career, I lived a life of service and I want to continue to do so. And I really wanted to do this. And then they were also like, what else can we add here to make sure that we are writing a strong supporting letter? The worst thing that one could have, and I've been evaluator of fellowships for the Society of Neuroscience and for SACNAS, is a weak letter of recommendation, because you're competing with so many, right? And so I think that if you can help your writers kind of work on your letter, I think you'll have higher chances of having a really strong letter. I mean, these are really busy people, right? So I sent them the request for the letter. Once they said yes, I replied with my CV and the question, like the things that were expected for fellows, with bullet points of things that I have done that are good for that. And I recommend to everybody that has reached out to me to do the same.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to this besides just make it as easy on your letter writers as possible to write you a glowing letter of recommendation, and even just let them know, I chose you because I think you can really speak to these skills that I have and that I hope I've made very abundantly clear in my time working with you, and I mean, just do your best for them is my only recommendation.
Key takeaway, make it easy. That's great. Okay, so we have another audience question here, which is, how interested in politics were you before you considered a career in science policy? And what would you say to someone who's interested in science policy, but not sure yet if they want to spend their entire career on it? So I'll go ahead and start with Ope, if you can kick us off.
The question says politics, right? Politics. I don't know that I was super interested in politics. I followed the news when you have elections coming up, and I wasn't super interested in politics. Definitely more interested these days than I was before the fellowship. And sorry, I missed the second part of the question.
It was what would you say to someone who's interested in science policy? So this is different than the politics part, but different.
Yeah.
Who's in science policy, but not sure they want to spend their career in it after.
Yeah. I think something to highlight is, while most CCST fellows go into policy after the fellowship, not everybody does that. Like Alex is a great example. She's not in science policy right now, and she did the fellowship. So I don't think you're tied to a policy career after this. This is 1 year of trying out something new and learning new skills. If you're not interested in academia, especially, and you want to go into industry or other fields outside of academia, the skills that you gain during this year of fellowship are super important and will set you up for whatever other career that you're going into. And so I think it's worth a shot to try for it and spend a year learning and networking and meeting new people in a cohort of other people as well. So it's not just you at a new job in a new place. You have 13 inbuilt friends basically when you come to California. So yeah, I think it's worth a shot.
Great, thanks. All right, so this next question we have is one that I think a lot of our candidates for the fellowship are probably the most nervous about. So, what is the process like for getting placements assigned? How much influence do fellows have over the placement location? And I'll go ahead and start with Stephanie, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. The placement process seems very, very stressful when you're in it. I mean, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. Everybody gets really anxious because you've come to California, you've done a big potential career shift, and like this seems like the thing that's really going to make or break you. But the process is really thoughtful. You spend the first month in training with CCST, and during that time, you're also getting to know the staff and meet with them, and they're learning about you the whole time. And so like you have people who like are really starting to understand you and on your team and want to put you in the best placement for you possible and like going to help you with your eventual career goals. So the way that process generally looks is like you go through a series of interviews with the potential placement offices, and the fellows rank who they're interested in most, and also the placement offices respond and like talk about who they felt a best connection with. And during that time, CCST is coming together and like they are doing their magic behind the scenes, and like they know so much more than like I did as a fellow about like what was really going to be a good fit for me. And so like it's important as a fellow during that time to be like really honest and think about like what you're trying to get out of your fellowship here. Like what skills are you interested in learning? Like what has been really something that like would be great for you to work on, and like even just think about what your skills are like very broadly from grad school, and like how that would work in a team, or how do you like to work in a fast-paced environment. And like CCST gets to take all that information and help you be in the best place possible. And so I think fellows definitely do have influence on where they go, and I would also say like trust the process. I mean, that's kind of the overwhelming motto during this time, is that CCST is invested in you and invested in like putting you in the place where you are going to grow the most and like be the best asset for California.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. Did anything come up for either of you, Alex or Ope, before I move on to the next question?
No, I just wanted to add that, it's really interesting. It was interesting to me because I honestly didn't even think that the organization like CCST was going to take our input and like it was going to ask us to rank the offices that were of interest to us. And I think that is, to me, to begin with, super valuable. Like you care what our top 5 choices are, and you do your absolute best to place every fellow within their top 5 or so. And I think that's a really difficult job to do as an organization, but also I think it is great for us because it demonstrates you're really invested in us and trying to provide us for the opportunity that will align really well with our interests. But sometimes if that is not the case, then you align it with our skill sets. And it has been extremely successful because the fellows in my year, a lot that didn't even think they would be in business or in legal things, are actually still in those roles. And so I think that you are all like master matchmakers. So yeah, that's all I wanted to add.
Thanks so much, Alex. All right, so for this next question, I'm going to ask, I think I'm going to start with you, Alex, because you had some really great tips for the letters of recommendation. But thinking about the entire application process, how did you approach it? What should our applicants, what should they focus on when it comes to their personal statements?
I think that is we have to think about a personal statement as the way it's like your presentation card to the committees. They don't know you and they want to know that they could invest in you because this is really what you want to pursue. And so in order to demonstrate that you are really committed to an opportunity like this, because this is of genuine interest to you and your professional development, you have to tell your story. Like, who are you? And what drove you to pursue science to begin with, and what has guided you to make the decision to want to see what science policy is, and what are the things that you have done during your journey that have strengthened you as a candidate and made you realize that this is a really well-informed decision that you're making. It's not a stepping stone for your next step. And so I think that to be honest, completely transparent, I knew people that didn't get in the fellowship. And so even though after I did a first postdoc for 2 years, and during my second postdoc, I wanted to apply since the first week I was in my second postdoc because I knew I wanted to pursue a career either in policy or leadership. And I really, I love science policy. And so what imposter syndrome got the best of me. And what I did was I literally just went and saw the requirements. And I made sure that I tackled every single point that the organization said that is looking for in a candidate. And so I told who I was, I told how I got interested into science, but I also shared the story of I've been interested in science because of my personal reasons, but I've always wanted to have a life of service. And I've demonstrated that I've lived a life of service through my service in outreach and education and mentoring and all these things. And then I combined everything to say, this is what I need to pursue the job of my dreams. And I think that if you have the ability to share what has gotten you to this point and why you want it and why you are the candidate for it, I think that that's great. It takes a lot of work. People should be able to read your statement and give you feedback. Because it's better when you have a fresh set of eyes. I can tell you, hey, this is missing this, or do you just want it for just because? And so that's also what I did. I gave my statement to a lot of people. And I will just finish by saying, don't be discouraged if you apply and you don't get in. It's highly competitive, but you can apply again. And so then you modify your personal statement and you make sure that your letters are really strong. And we're always really happy to help former fellows. My LinkedIn people reach out all the time and I'm happy to give feedback. So yeah, just utilize your resources. Yeah.
Thanks so much for that. Oh, Ope.
I was just going to add something else that I had in my, I think Alex made really great points. Something else I had in my application was why I chose CCST, why particularly did I want to work as a fellow at CCST, and also where I saw myself in the future and how CCST was going to help me get there. So those were two other.
Excellent. We have some really great questions coming in, so everybody keep them coming. These are awesome. The next one we have is there any particular event that stands out during your fellowship period? What is the most exciting project you worked on during your placement? I'm going to go ahead and start with Ope.
I guess the thing that I'm most proud of from the fellowship is working to convene stakeholders for an urban forest project that we're working on. So if you ever come to Sacramento, if you've been to Sacramento, it's full of trees. It's one of the nicknames is the city of trees or something. So I love it. That's one of the reasons why I love the city. But California in general is considering, or the CDI, the Department of Insurance, was trying to figure out a concept for insuring trees and how to help manage and protect the trees that we have in California. And so we got to talk to people from TNC, people in Hawaii and on the East Coast, and various other stakeholders, so nonprofit organizations, whether they were small or across the state, and even the state forester. So people at CAL FIRE and the Department of Forestry in California. And so just getting those people, having the smaller meetings at the beginning to get the ideas, the challenges that people were going through, and then bringing everybody to the same room and getting to talk about this problem and see a way forward and get people connected was something that I was super proud of. And I'm hopeful that down the line, something will come of it, but that was a fun experience.
That's really cool. Thanks for sharing that, Ope. Stephanie, do you have any experiences that jump out to you?
Yeah, I mean, what's kind of fun about being in the legislature is that you get a bunch of different bills that come through your door, and they can be on just this incredible breadth of topics, even within the water parks and wildlife jurisdiction. I got to analyze so many different things. And I think the bills that stand out the most to me are the ones where like I really struggled on, where like some things come through and you're like, oh, I can see why this is going to be a problem, and maybe we should work together to fix this. And then other things I was like, it's really hard for me to figure out what is the best move here and how complicated things are. And I think that was really interesting. Not that I expected anything to be black and white, but even just to be in this position and talk to other people about these ideas and like how would you handle this? And a lot of people are just like, you know what, this is really complicated stuff, and like we're doing our best in these different ways. And I think just like how much negotiation there is over things is like what really stood out to me during the fellowship, that like there was no black and white on nearly any subject. And I think that was really, I mean, that's the stuff that gets me excited, and I wanted to be a part of that and kind of figure out how to tease apart issues. And so I think that's the best thing that stands out to me.
Very cool.
I guess I'll add, there's two things. I mean, I think that, being able to work kind of like helping manage projects that were funded because they demonstrated that they could have an impact in the population of California within 5 years. What's amazing, because these are leaders in their fields developing devices or interventions that will help children affected or families with adverse childhood experiences. So that was a huge deal for me. I was like on it. The second thing, the second thing was the visit to the San Quentin prison that CCST took us. It had a huge impact in me because, just hearing directly from people that are there, and how, they would talk about early interventions, and how they could have impact and influence their decisions or the mistakes that they made was really probably the biggest highlight. And the third one I would say is that I was a mom. I became a mom when I started the fellowship. And I never thought that leadership of a fellowship could be so supportive. And so as a new mom, it was like really interesting to see the outpouring of support from the placement office and from CCST leadership. And so I have nothing but respect for everybody at CCST and from my placement office. And that was the highlight, honestly. Just working with amazing leaders that inspire you to be a better human, that was probably the biggest one.
Thank you, Alex. That was great. Oh, that was amazing. Okay, so the next question we have is, what was an unexpected challenge you experienced with the fellowship, and how did you navigate? How did you navigate that? Did you rely on your cohort, mentors? How did that go? And I'm going to start with you, Alex, if that's okay.
Yeah. So, challenge was that, one of the difficulties was that everybody from all of these projects were spread out through California. And so one of the biggest challenges was I had to be really well structured. And so I wanted to have more advice on like coordination of events, or like even meetings with leaders that are leading institutes or, really large groups. And so I sought advice from cohort fellows, like my colleagues, but also the leadership in my placement too. And I think that, we don't need to know all the answers. We shouldn't invest a ton of time searching on our own for answers or tools that could make our job easy, but rather we could also go to people after you've done some of the research and be like, hey, what do you utilize for this? Like, how do you approach this management specific, situation? And I think that that was honestly the only challenge that I had. And then, of course, personally, like becoming a parent and trying to navigate when kids are sick and how to, but there's a lot of communication is essential. And the ability to do hybrid work was essential to me to be a successful fellow and a good mama. So yeah, those are the 2 points I have for that.
Great. Stephanie, Ope, any unexpected challenges that came up for either of you? All right, great. That means we prepared you well, then. All right, the next question that we have is, would you recommend including soft skills in your resume? Is that something you considered? Did you do it? And how do you maybe think that landed? So I'm going to start with Ope for that one.
I'm not sure I understand what like adding soft skills in the resume means.
Yeah, so it's like soft skills as far as like not, some of your technical skills that you have are, analyzing
Right.
things, all of that. But soft skills really speaks to, you as a person, your personality, your, how you interact with folks, like some of those things that you can't really put in, it's hard to put into writing,
Right, right.
But the
I
thing,
imagine,
yeah.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it.
I was going to say, I imagine the statement of purpose is like the obvious place to put that kind of information. In my resume, I put in the technical stuff, but then I also put in like volunteer organizations that I was a part of, or volunteer positions that I had had. And I think that was kind of how I highlighted those, the soft skills and communication and collaboration and things like that. So that's kind of what I have for that. I don't know if anybody else has something to add.
Yeah, I structured mine very similarly. Like I had a lot of professional science related things and then a section for volunteer and yeah, the blogs that I had written about a variety of topics, the classrooms that I had like generated outreach materials for, and yeah, the kind of the outcomes of those things to show kind of like the practical and even just the amount of time that I've been engaging in these things to prove that this has been kind of a core part of my motivation in science for a while. But and I agree, I think a lot of that came out more in the statement of purpose.
I think when people think about like policy fellowships, we all come from this scientific background and we put all of our articles and stuff. But when you start the fellowship, we quickly realize that nobody really cares about your publication record or even like that you have a PhD, but rather like, are you a good team player? Do you have good time management skills? Do you have cultural competency? Like those are all soft skills and they are essential for being a good policy person. And so if you know this ahead of time, you should totally add it, or at least add it in your personal statement. Make sure that your letter of recommendations have that embedded with them, like the strength that you would bring as a team player. And, you will learn quickly that what you can say about your articles is the ability to start and finish a project and communicate to an audience that, it's all about communication, being a team player, and just the soft skills are actually here, the strength in a policy world. Yeah.
Great, thank you all for that. So the next question, Stephanie, I'm going to direct it towards you. What was your interview process like? What did you do to prepare for the interviews?
Yeah, so CCST kind of does a staged interview process, and there's kind of different goals for each. So I mean, maybe CCST can speak better to that, but as far as getting prepared, my university did have a professional like career development section, and there's a lot of questions on those pages that I like thought about and started processing and thinking about responses to. That was really helpful to prepare. I did also just ask people to interview me practically, but I think the best thing to do is just spending a lot of quiet time and thinking about your motivation for doing it. Like at your core, what are like the 3 things that really made you interested in this and kind of wanting to shift away and do a very bold move and change kind of career trajectories? Like what what makes you sure that this is the move for you? And then thinking about just like reflecting on any job you've had in grad school, like what are things that you like and didn't like? And I mean, very broadly, like not just like, oh, I don't like pipetting that much, like not that kind of stuff, but like, how did you like to communicate? How did you feel about meetings? How were you when things went fast? Like, what are your reflections on teamwork and how you'd like to operate in those spaces? And thinking about how you get to take those skills and bring them into a new field. Because I mean, I think that's been an overall theme so far in a lot of these questions is that the skills you have as a scientist, although you won't be probably in the primary literature anymore, you get to use those research skills, those team building skills, those communication skills. Like, how do you think about when you're giving a presentation to your teammates, how you're going to start them from square one and bring them along on this journey with you, and how you reached your conclusion and why that's the most acceptable conclusion based on what you know? And like, you're going to need to do those things in a policy world. And so I think like your job in the interview is to like show who you are as a person and like why you're motivated to do it, and that you have the skills to do the job and you're interested in doing it. So like thinking about how you want to accomplish all three of those things. And I think there's a thing, it's called like STAR, and I forget all of those breakdowns, but there's a lot of helpful tools out there about how to like best answer interview questions so that the people who are interviewing feel like they know you and like that you're excited to do the job.
That's great, Stephanie. Thank you for that. The next question we have here is, how much independence do you have as a fellow when executing assignments in your placement office? And Ope, I'll start with you on that one. How much independence do you have when you're executing assignments?
I think it depends on the office and also on, I guess, what the tasks are. But at the beginning, I was definitely following my mentor around and joining meetings along with them. And then over time, as I started to gain ownership of some of the projects, I was able to lead the direction, maybe not entirely the direction, but most of the day-to-day tasks from that for each of those projects. So setting up the workshop or the convening that I mentioned earlier, I was able to meet with stakeholders by myself or with a teammate. And so I think it depends on where you're comfortable. A lot of times you're, like everybody has said, there's communication that's super important. And so communicating where you're comfortable with taking the lead, or where you'd like more assistance or more direction is super important. And I think during the fellowship, I was able to try to do that as much as possible with my mentor, to ask for, okay, can I go this way? And then once I was given the go ahead, to take the lead and move on. So it depended on, like, early in the fellowship, I was doing most things with my mentor. And then later on during the fellowship, I think they let me try to figure things out myself.
Great. Okay, so the next question we have is, there's a lot of opportunities out there besides CCST, and there's a lot of jobs, postdocs, and fellowship programs. How did you decide to choose CCST? Did you consider other places? How did you land on CCST? And I'm going to go ahead and start with Alex on that one.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because there's not a lot of opportunities like this that would allow you to get first-hand experiences in policy with amazing policymakers in a state that's like so solid in, driving environmental issues, health issues, and equity issues, right? So I think that was, to me, the decision was easy when I was thinking about the fellowship as an investment for my future professional career, which is what I think too about a postdoc, right? But the reality is that I knew I didn't want to be in the bench. I did not want to be a bench scientist. I wanted to contribute with my skill sets to bigger issues. And so I think that if you reflect on fellowship, and this fellowship specifically, I would really highly recommend for everyone to see it as an investment in yourself. The experience you get is something nobody can take away from you. And the networking that you build will lead you to kind of know of opportunities that sometimes are not even listed. And so I think there's so much power into becoming part of a fellowship like this one, which is also not as massive as other policy fellowships, where you're kind of disappearing in the masses. But this one is smaller, and you get more of that one-on-one, more of that networking. When you're a fellow, it's like a prestigious thing. When I was walking around like at the Capitol, people are like, oh, she's a CCST fellow. And I was like, oh, hey. And so like, it's great. Like, it's a really, the name of the fellowship, but the fellowship itself carries a lot of weight. And I think that when I thought about it, I was just thinking, and I knew of this before I applied, that, it was a really good investment in my career. And I knew the reputation of the fellowship and the fellows, former alumni. And so I just saw it as an investment, and I was really excited. That's why I chose it. I just wanted to invest in my professional career. Mhm.
Great, thank you. The next question we have here is, what are the job prospects for a fellow, and how do CCST and the Alumni Network help you navigate that process? After you finish your fellowship, how do you think about landing a job? What support systems did you rely on? So I'm going to go ahead and ask Stephanie for that one.
Yeah, I mean, what's great is that you get this kind of entire year to be doing the job, and you're building connections that whole time. So I asked my two mentors all throughout the year, like, who should I be getting coffee with? I have this master Excel sheet that I call the Rolodex, where I log everybody that I ever met with in their emails, just because, like, who knows? Like, I didn't know at day one of the fellowship where I was going to be led to near the end. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious when all of us are like moving out of science. Like, you don't really know where the path is going to take you, and like being open to that. So I think preparing all the while to like have these connections and think about what would be interesting to me. And so as far as job prospects, I mean, you have this like really interesting collection of skills now between your scientific technical skills and your political policy skills now. So as far as job prospects, I think a lot of people after their fellowship year find that they get really passionate about the subject matter that they were doing their year on. And so a lot of people try to stay adjacent to that. And so you can look for like continuing state service options between like the legislature and more executive branch careers. Some people do want to go back to science, but they still want to stay in the policy field. So there are like a lot of environmental scientist positions, for example. And I think fellows are really competitive for these jobs because they inherently know now how all of these systems work. And so you don't come in from square one, which is like really compelling for potential employers. And the fellowship alum are incredibly supportive and very available to be helpful. I mean, all of us get assigned an alumni mentor that we get to do the year with, and like they are helping throughout the whole time to like help gear you towards that way. And the way you get to make all these different connections, like there is going to be a fellow somewhere if you're interested in there that you can probably reach out to. And if not, then there's a fellow who knows somebody there who can like get you an informational interview to get you prepped for the next job. So I mean, I'm in the same fellowship office, or I'm in the same office that I was during my fellowship. So I didn't need to go very far because I got this opportunity that I wasn't going to let go.
Great.
I was going to add, sorry, that support that the fellowship gives for the job process is also throughout the year, we have seminars and workshops. We also have the retreat where we get almost like it's a 2-day retreat, and you get intense job search, career advice from experts in the field. And so there's that support that you get over time where you're encouraged to think about what you're learning now and how you see it applying to what you want to do in the future. Lots of resources that come along with that too.
Yeah, Ope, I wanted to share that. So I just wanted to like share that was a really like one of the highlights of my fellowship too, was that retreat, because it makes you reflect on the fellowship, what makes you happy, and what will be the next steps for you professionally. So I think that it's not like they're pushing you to pursue like science policy, but rather to reflect on your experience in your placement, to interact with others and see what they experience. And then you can reflect and see, what is it that I want to do next? Yeah. I thought that was also a really awesome part of the fellowship.
Thank you all for that. This next question actually is one of my favorites because I love Sacramento, but I want to ask you all, and I'll start with Ope. What was it like moving to and living in Sacramento? And how did you find adjusting to a new place? What are some of the highlights? Were any highlights for you for the time that you spent in Sacramento?
So I moved from Omaha, Nebraska to Sacramento. So the weather, if you've been watching the news recently, it had like minus 20 degrees during the weekend. I was like, no, I'm glad I'm not there anymore. But I moved here in August to start. I actually was one of the few people that started earlier than the fellowship in September. And I've mentioned trees, love the trees in Sacramento. My placement office was on the 17th floor of a building that's by the bridge. And every day I would go just look out the window, just stand for a little bit and look out the window. It was just so beautiful. The farmer's market is year round. So like every Saturday, you can always go to the farmer's market. Lots of great bakeries and fruit. And California is it's been really nice to be around fresh fruit all year. Just all the different varieties too. I really enjoyed it. There's also the cohort experience that I had. I feel like my experience of California and Sacramento would have been super different if I didn't have 13 other people around me doing it. And so I roomed with a fellow. We're rooming together at a house, and that was like our base of activities, and we'd have watch parties we had watch parties for like the Oscars, I think it was last year. We had potluck dinners and breakfasts, and yeah, so lots of things to do in Sacramento. We've gone on hikes around the area, 2 hours away from the Bay Area, 2 hours away, 45 minutes away from different hiking spots. And so lots and lots to do. I love it here.
I love to hear that. Anyone want to add in or?
I mean, I love the food. California is just really like an amazing, if you love food like I do, this is an amazing place to be. Also, like, I think that having, the ability to go to Lake Tahoe if you want, and it's like an hour and something away, or coming to San Francisco. And like, it's just Sacramento, it's like allows you, like, you're in the middle of so much. And the access to amazing, good quality food. It was great. The diversity was important for me. And so I think that, like, of course, the cohort makes a huge difference. I lived in Davis, which is not far from Sacramento, so we're right next to it, but it was really different once I started the fellowship, because we had lunches, and I never really had experienced Sacramento in the same way until I started in this fellowship. So you learn so much about the history, and access to all these people is great. There's a really dense population of really highly skilled people in this one place, which is great, because the networking, even having coffee, I met people that I didn't meet through like the fellowship. So I think it's just like an amazing place. Yeah.
Thanks for that. And I'm also going to plug Kings basketball is also fun to watch. Couldn't help myself with that one. Okay, well, another question we have here, I'm going to direct this towards you, Stephanie, is what is work-life balance like in your placement while you're in your placement office and now? And, was there much statewide travel involved in your placement?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some like deprogramming from grad school that all of us needed to do when we came into our new job. And that was another great advantage to having CCST, and then also our own cohort, so we could all kind of come together and like discuss that and work on having a better work-life balance. But I would say there's definitely work-life balance now. I mean, even in the legislature, where it's kind of a roller coaster of fast and slower paced time, like even throughout all of that, like that is still the balance that there's faster times and there's slower times. And generally everything is 9 to 5, which is different and awesome. So yeah, I think, and especially like during those stressful times, it is important to know how you're going to balance that out in your personal time. Like what things are gonna calm you down, amp you up, how are you gonna de-stress? So like for me, it's a lot of baking and cycling and things like that, and getting out and just enjoying the very beautiful access to natural resources, both Alexandra and Ope were saying. And now it's quite similar. I mean, I have more responsibilities now than I did as a fellow, but it's really just kind of night and day for that structure and like what's expected of you. And like there are still times like things get busy and I will need to work outside of those 9 to 5 hours, but like that's very okay, because also it's a thing I'm excited to do. In terms of statewide travel, I think that really depends on where your placement is. In like CCST does organize these really awesome field trips. So we got to see like most recently the Oroville Dam nearby, which is very cool. So those things are kind of already seeded into the fellowship. And then as a committee consultant, you can go around to different field trips people are hosting to see, like for me in my spaces, looking at like new parks or this kind of conservation area and how we're helping this animal out. Or if you're in a personal office, you'll probably be going to your assembly member or senator's district and like learning about their issues within their district. And then I think for people who get placed in more executive positions, there's a lot of opportunity, I think, to travel and like go around and see all the different programs that somebody's running and meet people across the state. So I think really depending on your placement, there's more or less, but I think we all try to take advantage of those as much as possible when they're available.
Awesome, thank you. So we're nearing the end of the session. Panelists, I'd like for each of you to provide a final word of advice to prospective applicants to close things out. I'd love to start with you, Alexandra, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. I think that, when I just would encourage all like anyone that is interested in pursuing, a career that is either in policy or policy related, to give yourself the opportunity to experience it, firsthand and apply. Don't remove yourself from the competition just because you're uncertain, because there's nothing better or stronger than making a well-informed decision. And if you don't have exposure to things, how can you really know if this is for you or not? And what I had viewed as a science policy was completely different when I started, it was even better. And so I just encourage everybody to apply. I mean, this policy fellowship really impacted significantly in a good way my professional career. And so I think that it opened huge doors. And I think that I would encourage everybody to do it because it will be really helpful for everyone. Yeah.
Stephanie, any word of advice?
I think just like maintaining openness, and I think that means like in terms of how you think about your skills and what you want to bring and what you want to do, but also just knowing that this is like a very cool time to discover new things and new things to be passionate about. So I like just to come back to that idea of like placement offices. I mean, there is so much very interesting stuff to dig into, and like to just be open to a year of exploration and adventure is the best way, I think, to approach the CCST interview process and application process, and then actually a fellowship year.
Great, thank you. And Ope?
Yeah, I love that openness advice. That's true. I'd say to start on your application as well and try to get your recommenders links out to them as soon as possible. You want to give them enough time in between to make sure that they get it in before March 1st. So you don't get kicked out of the system, but after March 1st. So yeah, definitely make sure you're putting in things on time. I'd also say to take informational interviews. You've heard from 3 of us today, but there are 172 trained fellows now. So go on LinkedIn, look for people, ask questions, and let their answers help inform you of your decisions and how you want to approach your career too. So yeah, but apply, go for it.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to all of our panelists for joining. We really, really appreciate all of your advice. It's super invaluable. And I want to thank everyone who joined us today. As a reminder, our applications close on March 1st. So if you want to watch this webinar again, or if you have a colleague who is interested but couldn't make it, we'll post this webinar on our website. So you can also watch other alumni chat about their fellowship experience on our YouTube page. So please reach out if you have any other additional questions, and thank you and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.